Hey everyone, it's FLAK Fire. Battlefield 2042 is launching at one of the wildest moments in gaming history. Not only was the game built during a pandemic, but it's also arriving as part of that jump to next-gen consoles. The latter part there will have some far-reaching consequences for Battlefield players. We'll talk about that shortly, but I wanted to mention I had a chance to review Tank Mechanic Simulator, and you can check that out at Gimme using the link in the video description. I had a blast with this indie game, restoring tanks and building my own museum. I'll break down some pros and cons, and you can even ask me questions about the game directly. Make sure to follow me on Gimme and check back regularly for new reviews. Next month, I'm booting up the remastered version of one of my favorite World War I games, Toy Soldiers. That said, Battlefield dropping on current and last-gen consoles. It's a bigger deal than many might realize. You're probably aware of some of the surface differences, right? On last-gen consoles, the graphics obviously aren't going to be as impressive, and the player count is capped at 64 instead of 128. DICE and EA also recently announced that Hazard Zone games will feature fewer squads on last-gen tech. What many people don't realize is that the PS4 and Xbox One versions of Battlefield 2042 have smaller, redesigned maps to work under the technical constraints of those aging consoles. That might not seem like a huge deal at first until you see the actual comparison between last-gen and next-gen versions of the game. Thankfully, during the beta, we were able to see some of the key differences between the two versions, and quite honestly, it's a little bit startling. About half of Orbital is off-limits for players on last-gen tech. This includes the radar station at Objective A1, the security checkpoint at Objective F2, and the cryogenic plant in Sector C. On a related note, there's obviously no tunnel access between the cryo plant and the crawlerway at D2. The result of these changes is a much smaller map. Don't get me wrong, Orbital is still a huge map, even on last-gen consoles, but it goes without saying that this is clearly going to play differently from the version on PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. While there are fewer players, there is also significantly less sprawl and, indeed, a narrower space for players in which they operate. We can see from the screenshots, DICE added new objectives which will vastly transform the flow of the map and the concentration of players. Most notably, developers added a second capture point to somewhere inside of the assembly building. This will drive even more players to the tower, and it will place a premium on controlling the entire building, not just the top, right? There's also a new objective by the launch pad as well, this one located in a more open area at the foot of one of the zipline towers. The overall construction of the map and the placement of objectives is much more linear than the next-gen version of the map. A common complaint I heard during the beta was that there was a lot of quote-unquote wasted space on the map, and that players would have to spend quite a bit of time running from one objective to another. In some ways, that makes it feel a little bit boring. On PS4 and Xbox One, that space is gone, and everything is just so much more compact. I would say this likely translates to more frequent firefights and also some more clearly defined battle lines, and that is a topic that I really want to hit home on here. One of my biggest frustrations with the beta on next-gen consoles and PC was that fighting seemed really sporadic, and enemies would just crawl out of the woodwork from all directions. This made it difficult to hold objectives, and it created little coherent map flow, which is something I find frustrating. Specifically, there were only a couple of places you felt an actual battle line between the objectives at D sector and in the C sector, and also at the assembly building at Objective A. The rest of the time, to me, it seemed much more like a squad-based battle royale, which is fine if you enjoy that sort of thing, but right, this is Battlefield. Now, I've never been fully convinced that increasing the player count was the right direction for Battlefield to go. It's significantly harder to balance because you suddenly got twice as many variables, right? DICE have been doing 64-player games for nearly 20 years. It's their bread and butter. They know how to do that, and they do it well. Meanwhile, 128 players, uncharted territory for DICE. It's not to say that it can't be done, but I would expect to see some speed bumps here, some growing pains, that sort of thing. I'm going to toss out the idea that if you played the beta and didn't really gel with it, this could be a big part of it. On a side note, I'm actually much more interested in Battlefield 2042's more linear breakthrough game mode. That's where I personally think that this title is going to shine, primarily because it forces large amounts of players into small portions of the map, where I imagine things will be insane, in a good way. But for Conquest, I think you're going to get a much better experience on the PS4 and the Xbox One because of the reduced map size and that traditional player count. Might have to wait a little bit longer for loading, but if it's a better experience, it's a price I'm happy to pay. It's also entirely possible that DICE may put up a classic 64-player game mode for players on next-gen systems. Or you could, of course, probably just build that in Portal, but the 128-player mode, that's always going to be the flagship for new consoles and PC, and that by default means that it's going to be the place where the bulk of the players are located. Another reason you might gravitate to the last-gen versions of Battlefield 2042 is that it will exist in its own cross-play bubble, including only PS4 and Xbox One. This is definitely the best option for controller players who would prefer to play without those on mouse and keyboard. It also eliminates the potential for PC cheaters entirely. If DICE's anti-cheat solution goes sideways, the last-gen Battlefield 2042 already has protections built in. So, overall, if you're looking for that classic 64-player Battlefield experience, balanced crossplay, and no chance of PC cheaters, the best experience for Battlefield 2042 might be on the old PS4 and Xbox One. Of course, if you can't land a next-gen console, you might not have a choice in that. For those fortunate enough to own a PS5 or Xbox Series X or S, kind of a bit of a secret here, you can install both versions of the game if you pick up the crossplay bundle. So as long as you're playing the Xbox One or PS4 version of Battlefield 2042, if you happen to be on the next-gen consoles, you are still going to match up crossplay-wise with other people playing that version of the game. It might cost you a few extra bucks for the crossplay bundle, but, games are about enjoyment, so find the experience that you'll enjoy the most. That's my words of encouragement for this video. Unfortunately, for those of you on PC, you're kind of stuck with that one version, so I hope you enjoy it. I am curious what you think about all this, however. Am I kind of on my own in thinking that, maybe the 64-player version of Battlefield 2042 might be the best one? Tell me what you think down below in the comments, and make sure to tell me which version of the game you're going to play. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If not, a dislike. Make sure to subscribe and tap the bell for all the latest Battlefield news. If you want to support the channel, keep your money, share this video. And as always, thanks for watching.